Well, my background, I started on the Hill in the late 80s and worked for Senator Jack Danforth from Missouri. And he just brought young people in and he gave them whatever was there. And healthcare was there for me, healthcare and civil rights law. And actually, civil rights was the reason I went there. We passed significant civil rights legislation in 1991, but I also worked on healthcare issues. And when I left the Hill, I went with him to a law firm, and I represented the Healthcare Liability Alliance, a group of those healthcare providers and insurers interested in malpractice reform. And so from there, I went to the Catholic Health Association as their general counsel. And then followed that with being the CEO of the American Health Lawyers Association. So my healthcare experience deepened with every job that I had. And so I worked here for 15 years, and now I'm at Ascension, which is a healthcare provider. So I am deeply into healthcare. I got in because of civil rights, but now I'm a healthcare lawyer.
Well, in a way, healthcare is a civil right, isn't it?
That's right, absolutely. That's a good point.
Now, how did you become involved here? How did you become the CEO?
I became the CEO when I was at the Catholic Health Association. I became a member of one of the predecessor organizations. And each summer at the annual meeting for one of the predecessors, I gave a Catholic health law update. And so when my predecessor, Mary Lou King, announced that she was retiring, someone brought to my attention the fact that the CEO position was opening up. And I knew a couple of people on the board, one of whom, Harvey Tettelbaum, used to serve on the board when I first arrived. And I contacted him and asked him if he thought it would be something that I would enjoy. And he agreed, thought it would be. And there was a guy named Bob Johnson who was the general counsel at the time, Catholic Healthcare West. And he agreed. And so the two of them kind of nominated me or put me into contention for it. And from there I interviewed and got that job.
You mentioned that this is any great organization has a founder syndrome and then CEO syndrome after that, someone who moves it forward. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well,
I mean, you were the third, but
I was the third, right? And certainly David Greenberg was the founder. He was the entrepreneur. He understood that there was a need for an organization that represented this new kind of lawyer that was a health lawyer. I mean, health law really came into being with the passage of Medicare and Medicaid in 1965. And then there were a group of lawyers that had kind of represented hospitals, but they did a lot of other stuff. And all of a sudden, I think with the passage of Medicare and Medicaid, there became enough work for a lawyer simply to specialize in healthcare and to do healthcare law. David recognized that when he was with the American Hospital Association and later when he founded his own organization. And he really had great insight into that. And as with a lot of organizations, you know, my guess is what he really enjoyed was the founding of the organization and understanding that there was a need there. And he put in amazing service, you know, for probably close to 20 years in founding this. And then when Mary Lou King came in, she was terrific as well. And she had budgetary issues when she first got here and was disciplined and strong in solving those budgetary issues and brought one of the predecessor organizations, really strengthened its staff and professionalized it. And it became a really strong service provider. And so, and she also oversaw the merger of the two predecessor organizations. And so, when she had done that, I think she thought, my work here is done. Like I've strengthened it, I've put it on solid financial footing, and now I've brought these two groups together. And so it's time for someone new, and I think that was when I stepped into it.
So how would you describe your challenges, your priorities when you came in?
My greatest challenge was to meld the culture of the two predecessor organizations. One was a staff-driven, professionalized organization that Mary Lou had run. The other was a member-driven component of the American Hospital Association without a lot of staff. And they had different cultures. And it was pretty apparent to me that when I interviewed, the interview committee had people from both predecessor organizations on it. It was a really large board that was in the process of shrinking. There was a need to really blend those two cultures into a single culture that would be for the benefit of health lawyers, and where members could both enjoy themselves and be given really strong professionalized services. And so my goal was to do that, and in truth, Mary Lou had absolutely stabilized the finance of the organization. But as within any merger, the finances, the expenses had risen more than the revenues at the time. And so they had budgeted for a deficit in the year I got there. And I hadn't really recognized it as I was interviewing for it, but it had been simply called, we have our challenges. And so there was a financial challenge right when I got here, and we stabilized that. We moved it into the black in the year that I was there, thanks to Wayne Miller, who works here. He's the COO and an excellent financial guy. And together we put it on solid footing. But most importantly, we found a way to blend those cultures. So now there's just a single American Health Lawyers Association culture. And that was the biggest challenge I had.
How would you describe that culture that emerged?
I think the culture that emerged recognizes member service as the primary goal of the organization. I hope people would say we are member-driven and professionally served. So the members, they have the expertise. They define what they need to know to be successful health lawyers. And so we want them in the driver's seat. But once the direction is pointed out, once the services are defined, the members then are very open to allowing staff to provide the best possible service they can. And we also, I think there's a sense of enjoyment and fun, and the fact that this is a professional organization that people enjoy, and that was emphasized to me. We have to keep that notion of professional camaraderie in the organization, and I hope that members feel like they really do get a lot of fun and camaraderie. At the same time, they're getting served well by a staff toward issues and priorities that they've defined. I would say that's the culture.
And more than blending the culture, you talk about the financial challenges. I mean, how did you overcome those financial challenges?
Well, initially, we had to find new services. We had to find new sources of revenue. And lucky for us at that time was right when distance learning was beginning to emerge. And so we really did that through the promotion of webinars for our members. Because previously, and still, we have a phenomenally strong in-person educational set of programs. And they bring in a great deal of revenue for the organization, and they provide great expertise and learning for the members. But it was not going to be enough. Our membership dues and our in-person programs were not going to be enough to financially steward the organization. So we developed these sets of webinars. And those webinars really helped us, especially in the first few years. And after 9/11, when people were extremely concerned about getting on airplanes and going to in-person programs, those webinars saved us that year and allowed us to continue to have net revenue and continue to add to our reserves at a time when, after 9/11, we were extremely nervous about the implications of that for our in-person programs. So I'd say we basically diversified our revenue streams. And now, I mean, I'm 2 years out, but membership dues is a more significant, because our membership has grown, a more significant amount of our revenue. Programs is still strong, but we're not as dependent on it, in-person programs. And then webinar revenue provided a really strong additional revenue stream, along with very solid revenue from publications.
You brought in sponsorship, right? Wasn't that something? Tell me about that.
Absolutely. No. That and really, Dick Cowart, who's with Baker Donaldson down in Nashville, gets the credit for that. I'm glad you raised that. That around 2002, 2003. Again, we needed additional revenue sources because we were growing a professionalized staff, and we needed additional revenue sources. Dick Cowart, who ultimately became the president, and I don't know if he was chair of the finance committee. He's a very savvy guy on transactions and financial issues. And he said, "You guys do a lot of events, but I don't see any. There's no sponsorship. Any other meeting I go to, you see sponsors that are promoting some of the services that you're giving. Why aren't you doing that?" And a light bulb went off in my head, like, oh my gosh, he's right. Like that, we need to develop that. So he not only made the suggestion, he got us our first couple of sponsors because he knew it. And we rely on our members for those connections because our sponsors are those that provide services to health lawyers. So our connections with them, again, come through our members. And that I feel like it's a hallmark of AHLA, that member and staff collaboration results in the organization being more effective and being more successful. That was a perfect example of member and staff collaboration. And Dick really was the idea person behind it, got us our first couple of sponsors. We then pivoted, and now we have staff that works on sponsorship, but she works specifically with members to try to, create the relationships that will advantage both our members, the sponsor, and the organization. So Valerie Eshelman is the staff member. She does a great job on it. But Dick Cowart and others, once Dick had suggested it, other members made the connections for us that created the sponsorships that, you're right, are a great, solid revenue stream for the organization that has really emerged in 2002 and continued and grown incrementally since then. And you could really say the margins of the organization, they had a strong basis on membership and in-person programs, but all of the growth that we've needed, over those several years has come from sponsorship webinars and some additional services that we've provided.
So no longer surviving on a shoestring, pretty much in good financial shape.
It's in strong financial shape. We have to continue to develop the services that our members need. I'm sure that remains an issue for David Cade. But yes, with the help of members, we developed revenue streams so that we had a little margin to work with.
And you recognize the need for a reserve fund.
Yes,
right?
Very much so. And that reserve fund grew. When I arrived, I think it was below 50% of 1 year's annual revenue. And the goal, I think, although there's always a debate on the board, I think the goal for a good, solid nonprofit organization is to have between a year and a half's expense. Actually, I said revenue, expenses, as reserves. So that if you have a 9/11, luckily that year, because of the development of webinars, we didn't have to dip into our reserves, but it was very important that we have reserves in case you have a 9/11 or you have something that really could threaten your revenue sources. You need to have that base of expenses so that you can continue to provide services and have the wherewithal to pivot and find the additional, revenue streams that you may need to go into the future.
Well, you faced a series of challenges, and I guess 9/11 was the first big one, right?
Right.
Tell us about that. What happened?
No, 9/11. It was a terrible. I'm sure everyone remembers where they were on 9/11. I was at a conference with Alice Gosfield, who's a past president of our organization, a Philadelphian, and we were both speaking at a conference in Kansas City. And 9/11 happened, and she and I both took a bus back from Kansas City it took me to the outskirts of Washington. It took her to Philadelphia on the way to New York. And after 9/11, there was a serious issue with people getting on planes to go to educational programs, and we had a fraud and abuse program scheduled 2 weeks after 9/11 in Washington, D.C. And I remember meeting with Doug Hastings at the time and others that were on our board and saying, what do we do? What should we, should we cancel it? And I've always loved the fact that they were like, no way are we canceling it. That is exactly what terrorists would want us to do. So we held this meeting at the downtown Hilton at DuPont Circle here in D.C. When you walked into the hotel, there was exactly one person behind the desk because nobody was staying at the hotel. There were so few guests that but every staff member looked at us with gratitude, like, thank you for holding this program. Thank you for continuing on as you should. And members came, not as many as had signed up, but members came. I think we had a strong program. It didn't make money that year, but and in the weeks after that, we had to strategize. What do we do if the rest of our programs suffer from the same lack of attendance that this one did? And they did, but they gradually picked up. And throughout that year, by the spring, we were at strong attendance again. And it was in that time, and Doug was absolutely committed to it. It was like, ramp up these webinars. They were really new at the time. It was a new thing to get on the phone and have someone talk to you about a health law issue. And it was great. He might have been chair of the finance committee at the time, and he just said, pivot to that, go to that, ramp them up. Let's just start giving our members webinars if they're not going to get on planes to come to our in-person programs. And just miraculously that year, we had net revenue. I did not think we would. I thought, but that's why you need a reserve. In case we didn't, we could have dipped into the reserves. We didn't have to, but that was through a ton of effort by this staff, by board members. Everybody was out looking out for the organization to make sure that we wouldn't have a failing financial year. And so it was, obviously it was a terrible moment for the country, for tons of businesses throughout the organization, but our members rallied to us when we needed them after 9/11, and it just, I think, shows the resilience of the organization and of its members.
Tell me a little bit about the webinars.
For webinars, members pay an admission fee that's a lot less than going to a program. It's a lot less than getting on a plane, getting a hotel room. They can access the webinar, and you have members that talk about a specific issue, and you might have facilitators on the webinar. The facilitator then facilitates questions and answers after someone has done their presentation. But the cost is a lot less than going to an in-person program. It's not the same experience. I mean, I love our in-person programs. We want all of our members to go to our in-person programs. But webinars are a good way to supplement that, and the provision of CLE credits, continuing legal education credits, really helps to make webinars successful. Back then, 2001, we didn't have CLE credits for webinars. They were so new. Now we do, and they're a way that members can continue to get those CLE credits and continue adult education about issues that are important to them. But AHLA survives on a really strong balance of in-person programs, webinars, membership dues, and publications. And webinars are a good way for members to get education.
2008, you faced another big challenge, the Great Recession.
Right. That was another a big financial challenge. And 2008 and 2009 was a recession that hit lawyers harder than most. I don't know how many people know that, but when you looked at the numbers of lawyers that were let go from law firms and the number of new health lawyers just coming out of law schools that were not hired, that were deferred, law firms simply stopped hiring. And in many ways, the law firm economy is a lot like the healthcare economy. I mean, you're paying a lawyer a significant amount of money per hour, and their work is then judged on the number of hours that they provide. It's very much like a volume-based healthcare-driven system, and it's one that does need examination. And I think it forced a lot of law firms to examine it at the time. The slowdown in business and in transactions simply didn't allow lawyers to be paid as much as they were and to have as many of them to work on issues. Now, I will say, and I made the point then, and I still believe it, health law maintains its strength through recessions because it's regulatory based. There continues to be a lot of regulatory work as healthcare organizations do their business. Transactions slow down, mergers and acquisitions slow down, but the regulatory work, the bread and butter of health lawyers continues. So I would go out to law students and say, you might look towards health law, because it's not as cyclical. It doesn't have the highs that mergers and acquisitions has, but it doesn't have the lows during a recession. And so we did okay. But our members, they stopped hiring health lawyers too. I mean, it slowed down throughout the entire legal community. And I think we survived it well, but that was another tough financial year for us. Our membership dipped. Now it's expanded a lot since then, but it dipped for a while in that period, and we had to, again, be nimble. And that's a good thing about the organization. With having a diverse set of revenue sources allows you to be nimble and rely on some one year, rely on some another year, to try to take into account the environmental factors that impact you.
So you survive by just diversifying your
right.
financial portfolio, basically.
Exactly. And every good nonprofit, when they need to, can tighten their belt. And we reduced expenses. I mean, and you have to be able to do that in order to survive. So yes, we diversify our revenue sources. We make greater claims on one revenue source over another. But in tough times, and we did it in 2001. I neglected to mention that. In 2001, we tightened our belts. And we did the same thing in 2008 and 2009. You have to have the ability to come together as a staff and figure out, how can we economize? Basically, how can we be more efficient, spend less for the period of the downturn, and then you can expand again.
Okay, I'm told the Public Interest Department came about and produced material for the public about key health issues during your time. Disaster preparedness, death and dying, and that. Tell us about that.
Right. Now, that is a key feature of the organization, and we have many members who are absolutely dedicated to it. And the goal of our public interest section is to provide insight and analysis on issues that are within health lawyers' specific area of expertise, but serve the public. And one that you mentioned that I have always been very proud of is what we've done on issues healthcare legal issues related to those near the end of their life. Elizabeth Belmont is a past president of ours. She had issues, as we all do, with our parents and those loved ones when she had to look for long-term care for her mom. And she talked to me about something called the chandelier effect. When you walk into a nursing home and it just looks great, but that's all you know about it. You just kind of get that impression of what it looks like, and you don't really have a checklist or an analysis of, does this really provide quality care, or am I being fooled by the chandelier effect? And I remember talking to her on the phone. I think I was in the car, and I said, you know this stuff now. You have this experience. You should write about this. And we could do it as a public interest project. We could, because that will benefit so many people. And Elizabeth is amazing at checklists. She understands the questions you have to ask to determine if you can get quality care. And so that was a public interest project we were very proud of, that Elizabeth helped to write. We then, in the public interest, then distribute those for free. That's a way we give back to the community, and we've done it in many different areas, as you mentioned. And those, I think the organization and its members can be rightfully proud of the way that we have selected to give back. We use our members' expertise that very few people in the public have to then generate checklist questions analysis that the public can ask. And when you think about that, some of our members take risks because they're using experiences they've gained representing clients, defending those clients. But when you're in an organization or representing a client, you also see issues that if the public knew more about, they would ask better questions about. And so it's a balancing act that our members have done, and they've produced incredibly good, insightful analysis for members of the public to ask on issues that are really important to them.
Did you produce a video?
We did. We produced a video with respect to the issues related to those nearing the end of their life. And that video, I think, was very helpful. Similar to the video I think that you're creating now. Should be helpful to, and was helpful to our members, walking them through how to have conversations with loved ones about issues related to the end of life. And that's something that I think no human being is born good at, because you don't want to contemplate the issues that will occur around the end of life. Parents don't want to face it, kids don't want to raise it. And this was a video that provided just an example of how to have those really important conversations with loved ones about advance directives, about trying to have everything in place for the generation that comes after you, and how to really be sensitive in having the discussions that matter most. So yeah, we did a video, and Carrie Hogard was great at making the preparations for that video, recruiting in members of ours that acted in it. And I think the staff did a great job of organizing it, and members volunteered their time in the video and did a great job for our members and for the public to learn about it.
Can you tell us about any fun stories, any hard time stories, any stories that come to mind that you tell friends about? During my time at the American Health Lawyers Association, this and that happened. It was...
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are so many stories. One story I tell that and I'm not sure why I started this tradition, but I had a tradition of roasting the president after every year of their presidency. And I just started it as a whim my first year here. And then it became the tradition that I had to do it every year. And so it was a struggle, because you had to balance. You were poking a little fun, but it was all in the right spirit. And so there was this balance, and I would kind of sweat it out, like, all right, what's the right combination of humor, but it can't be mean. It's got to be, it's a caring thing. And I always enjoyed doing those. I think the members that got roasted enjoyed it. It was a travail every spring to draft it, but I loved, to me, even though I always regretted starting it, because once I started it, I couldn't end it. But to me, it really was an effort to capture this new culture, that we could poke a little fun at each other. It was light. There was a lightness about being a member of the American Health Lawyers Association. It wasn't always serious business that, where the weight of the world was on people's shoulders. And that was the balance that I think people were looking for, that it was, we were giving serious information about serious issues and trying to be the best educators we could, but with a light spirit. And so I think that the roasts were kind of representative of that light spirit, and hopefully they then bled into the introductions that people had before programs. And the whole notion was, this is a convivial, congenial place to be, where we put aside our competitive instincts and natures, and we really try to support each other in a light way. So I always enjoyed that.
I want to get your take on health law and how it has evolved to where we are today.
Well, health law, and that's why I think for all those law students that are out there, health law will continue to be a source of great legal work for lawyers for years to come, because it's regulatory based. It's statutory based, and then there are thousands of pages of regulation that go along with those statutes, and they make the issue complex, and for better and worse. It's a complex area to negotiate, and whenever you have complexity in our modern society, you need lawyers to interpret that complexity, to help you through whether they're transactions or the provision of services or efforts at risk mitigation. you are going to need lawyers to do that. And what I love about health law, and again, I think most health lawyers will tell you this, and certainly law students should be aware of it. You're doing complex legal work for an end that is good. That is, health law is an area where you can really feel good about the ends for which you're working. And I think it attracts a certain lawyer. The lawyer that wants to do the big deal, that wants to do the merger that changes an industry, may go to one area of the law. But a lawyer that wants to do legal work that actually benefits vulnerable people every day is generally attracted to health law. And that, to me, is why a lot of people go into it. But the complexity of the areas means that you're going to be intellectually challenged every day. And so it's that combination that I think draws really good, well-intentioned people that want their work to really affect patients. And it's a great area to work in.
How do you see the future?
I think the future is, future is much the same for health lawyers. I mean, we're having this interview, and last Friday, the Republican effort to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act failed. And so, I think statutorily, legislatively, we're going to have a little respite. But the fact is that there are significant issues with the Affordable Care Act, and that the complaints are not random. There are fewer insurers that are coming into exchanges for those buying insurance on the individual market. There are rising prices in those individual insurance markets so that people are having to pay more for less choice. That's an issue that's not going away. So there will be legislation in this area, and hopefully at some point in the near future it'll be bipartisan legislation to improve our healthcare system. And I was just thinking about this. We need to ban the word Obamacare. We need to ban the word Trump care, and we need to ban repeal and replace. What we need is just a group of well-intentioned legislators who get together to improve the healthcare system that they're faced with, regardless of what it's called. And ultimately, they're going to have to do that because there are failures in the system now that need to be repaired. So for health lawyers, I think there is going to continue to be a steady diet of work. But hopefully for the health system, we'll move to one where for health lawyers the work is generated because the system exists based on volume, to one where the system thrives based on value, and that we have strong insurance marketplaces both for employers and for individuals, and that we have a reasonable Medicaid program for those who are poor and disadvantaged, and that we have the safety net for those who simply can't afford what is admittedly the high cost of health care.
Looking back on your time as CEO, what would you consider your greatest accomplishment?
I hope it's the culture issue. I hope that people think that I succeeded in bringing together two predecessor organizations and developed a culture which was member first, professionally supported, but member driven, and that was congenial and convivial, but also very purposeful in the high quality education that our members provided for their colleagues. And if people think that the culture was a good one, that we were financially successful, but that's not what drove us, and that we provided really strong quality services for members, then I'm good with that as what I left behind.
And on the 50th anniversary, where do you see this organization?
I think on the 50th anniversary, I hope that we have realized the vision of the founder, David J. Greenberg, that his ingenious creativity in seeing that there was a niche for the health lawyers that were emerging in the 1960s has come to fruition with a vibrant, strong community of individuals that practice in the area of health law, and that he would smile and be proud of what he had created, and that he thinks that his successors, Mary Lou, me, David Cade, all of the staff here have been good stewards of the idea that he germinated and brought to life.
Thank you very much. Anything you'd like to add?
No, I just am I'm very excited that AHLA is doing this video and honoring those health lawyers that really began this profession, and I think it's a great project.